welcome to Creative Constitution. Today's episode is all about screenwriting. I'm joined by 𝐇𝐎𝐏𝐿 and Daniel Bugeja, two amazing screenwriters. So, guys, tell me a little bit about yourselves.
So when I was younger, I always wanted to be a novelist. That didn't really work out, so I became a filmmaker for some reason. So I started off as a producer-director. I wanted to make my own stuff, but I felt like bringing on a screenwriter wouldn't be my own stuff. So I started to write my own scripts. In film school, I took a class on screenwriting, which then kind of taught me the basics. And from that, I wrote screenplays. So I've got 2 screenplays that I've written. Those 2 films are currently in post-production. And I'm currently working on a 3rd screenplay at the moment. I edit a lot of my friends' screenplays, which they send to me, which is very nice. So I kind of help them with screenwriting basics. But story-wise, in terms of story structure, I struggle with, so I bring Daniel on, and that's why I brought him today.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I start from a background in game design, actually, where I learnt some screenwriting and a bunch of different story structures. I later went on to pursue some creative writing, which eventually landed me in helping people with scripts and stories. In that process, I met Dia, which I think in the last 5 or 6 years, I've helped on numerous scripts, co-writing a couple of features, and just helping refine story. Where I struggle is in grammar.
Dialogue.
And dialogue. That's not my strong point. That's Dia's strong point. So we kind of trade off there. I do story. She does grammar. She's forever correcting me, but
that's awesome.
That's how we roll.
And what initially got you guys into writing in the first place? Is that something you've kind of always had an affinity for when you were younger?
Yeah. So like I said, when I was younger, I wanted to be a novelist. I loved James Bond stories, and I used to want to write my own like spy novels. I just didn't really have the patience though for novel writing. I still want to write a novel. It's still coming, but screenwriting I just found was a lot quicker. So I jumped into that. How about you?
As for me, I have an overactive imagination. I tend to also pick up creative hobbies like a sponge.
Oh my God.
So I love to create different types of stories and bring my ideas to fruition, whether that is in scripts or stories, visuals, whatever I find suits the art piece, really. So, and certain things have to be visual and some things have to be script. So
tell me, what do you guys do when you open Final Draft or whatever screenwriting software you use and you see the blank page? You've got an idea. What do? How do you tackle it?
I'm old school. I don't use screenwriting software. I hate it.
Handwriting?
I use Word.
Oh, Word.
The formatting of scripts kind of relaxes me.
So you press tab a lot?
Oh, yeah. So I write it like a normal kind of novel. So like you do the action line, then dialogue. And then once I finish a scene, then I'll go back, read over it. And while I'm reading over it, I'll format it. So I'll so I'll make that center. I'll make that indent. So that relaxes me a lot. And a lot of people think I'm crazy. Like, Dia, just use 𝐷𝐿 What are you doing? I'm like, no, you don't understand. When I first look at an empty page, I'm what they call a pantser kind of writer. So I write with no plan, no idea as to what I'm doing.
Wow.
I just brain vomit, and it comes out. Whereas Daniel here is the complete opposite.
Yeah,
meticulously planning.
I am a person that likes my structure. So I generally will work out what do I want to do with the story, what emotions or certain scenes I must have. And at that point, it's less about what the actual scenes are going to be and more about what are the things that I'm not going to negotiate on. So if there's one visual or image that's stuck in my head, I'll note that down. And that kind of becomes my starting point for starting to flesh out and working out how I'm going to make these things work together. And then I kind of flesh things out in that kind of structure. So dot points, start adding more, working out what scenes are going to be until I'm at a point where I'm happy with what I want to achieve. When I actually go to write my scenes, I kind of take a page out of Dia's philosophy. I find that writing dialogue is always better when you don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
I find if you overly plan dialogue, at least for me, it becomes too stiff and it becomes too kind of logical.
Yeah.
You got to have a bit of flow between them. So I find as long as I hit the emotions I want to hit and the major beats I want to hit, then that's good. I go back and refine it later.
I like that. So with the dialogue writing, I think both of you can give really good perspective on this. So with the beats and the emotions, is that usually what drives it, or is there almost like a checklist that you kind of have in your head that might be subconscious? Is there like a certain approach that you guys take?
Oh, in terms of dialogue, so whenever I'm out and about, I always like sticky beak into people's conversations. And I remember like important things or ways they speak. And I kind of note that down in my mental checklist. And so when I'm writing, I'll be like, okay, so what's each character's motivation in this scene? What do they want? And how would they speak? You basically want to go through a script and delete all the character names and read it without any character names, knowing who is speaking. So each character needs their own unique voice. And so, yeah, I look through my mental notebook. I'm like, okay, this person spoke like this one, so I'm going to copy that. Otherwise, if I didn't do that, it would just be me talking the entire time.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so...
No, I definitely agree. Me and Dia come from different kind of points and land on the same area. I understand a lot of elements from analyzing and breaking down story and people. So I see dialogue as the character is either a lens or a filter. And at any point in time, the way they speak and talk and verbalize their thoughts is a representation of their personality and their livelihood and how they've kind of grown up and basically everything about them. And sometimes I think in dialogue, the more important part is what people don't say. What a character is going to say to another character and what they're not going to say. Because in terms of scripts, the end product is visual. So there's some things you can do without using dialogue.
True.
That can say more sometimes.
So do you guys usually put a lot of emphasis on writing reactions?
It depends. I feel like reactions, it's more what emotion the reaction is invoking. So if I want the emotion to read as angry, that's once again depends on the character and that kind of lens that I'm seeing the character through. If I'm writing a script and I want it to be kind of very high level, first pass, I don't have too many ideas. I just want to get the beats out there. I don't write too much kind of description on, and it's generally seen as not a good practice to write too much description on what is there. You want to leave some room for your actors to develop the characters.
That's very true.
Keep it simple.
So with the character development side, when you don't really have much to go from at the start, how do you guys go about creating something that has its unique voice and unique personality?
So I guess, yeah, we do it kind of differently. I borrow a lot from life. So all my characters are based on people I know. Every single one. Thankfully, none of them have noticed yet. So
Your best friends
I
after listening to this podcast are you going to be like, wait a second.
honestly, I'm surprised they haven't caught on already because some of them are like spot on. I'm like, you're basically looking at yourself, just like ah. Yeah, so I look at what a lot of my friends do and I incorporate that into each particular character because I find that helps me separate the characters if they're all based on separate people because then I can kind of copy, oh, what would that particular person do in this situation? What about you?
Once again, I'm back to analytical. And I think this is why me and Dia work so well together because we're able to see things that other people can't and we've learnt our own strengths. For me, character, I have a couple different ways of doing it, but the first thing I actually do is I like to put just a blank page and a blank scene and write could be any scene as long as it's got a strong emotion. And I just write a character starting from that, and that's kind of my ground point. So anger, sadness, going to an extreme and how that character would represent that. And then from there, I have what I call a toolbox of kind of ways. Some of these I use psychology, some of these use kind of ways I've analyzed people. And they're ways for me to tweak a character to kind of achieve certain effects. So one of them is actually taking a note from psychology and how much someone has learnt kind of basic, what was a good example? How well someone's kind of ego is developed.
Right.
So how much do they lean to the rules? How much are they going to follow their base desires? Are they someone that will not care about their work and take a day off to go visit a friend? It's those type of little things, and I work out where they are, and that helps me kind of separate my characters and kind of have a bit of differentiation between them. I have a bunch of others that I use as well.
It kind of reminds me how in acting class you get taught to kind of analyze characters like animals. You know, you can almost like, this one's a bit more of like a bear, this one's more of an eagle. It kind of reminds me a little bit about that. So Dia, you with your real life people, can you kind of take similar things in that sort of sense? Like, do you kind of, when you look at a friend or you kind of listen in on a conversation, are you taking mental notes for stories that are already existing or stories that you are yet to create?
Yeah, I guess I'm a lot less analytical, so I just kind of, I don't know, do things subconsciously. So I've always got stories in my head, like always, and I'm always building upon them. Like I've got stories I wrote in high school that are up in my head that I'm always trying to better and better because I want to get rid of them. So yeah, I guess when I look at people, I take note subconsciously. Like I said, I'm not as analytical, but yeah, I definitely take note. I may not myself understand the notes. It just kind of goes in here and then comes out.
You kind of dip into them whenever you kind of need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good practice. Like even I have 3 notebooks that I keep. One of them, I just put down ideas. No context, no kind of information. It's just a way for me to keep track of ideas. And sometimes when I'm working on a piece and I feel like it's missing something, the idea will be in that book. Then I have a book where I just analyze things. So that's, even if it's like actual real people or someone had a conversation that caught my interest, or I saw a scene in a movie or in a book, and trying to understand why I like that scene or what caught me about it.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, and it's the conclusions in those areas that go into the 3rd book, which is how do I make this work, or how do I make this character more interesting, or I'm not feeling this scene is working. What could be the problem? That's where all my kind of analysis and conclusions go into that book, and that's the kind of thing that just sits on the desk. I don't write with it. That's a major point. I don't use that to say I have to write with these things in mind. They're there when I'm finding something's not working, or I want to kind of just shift something in the right direction.
That's really interesting. What is both of yours like approach when it comes to writing itself? So do you go in sprints? Do you write in big blocks? Does it take you 6 months to write a feature? What's your go-to?
Oh, that's a toughie. I write when I feel like it, or it's in the back of my head like, oh, I should write today, and then I don't.
Do you put it in the calendar?
Yeah, pretty much. I've been meaning to continue my novel like for the past couple of months, and I'm like, I'm gonna do it, and then I just haven't. But when I get in that mood where I feel like I need to write, I will just write until I can't write anymore, until like my fingers are dead. But yeah, in terms of how long it takes to finishing a screenplay, so my two screenplays are Jet and Disconnected. So Jet was birthed from a real life event. I was in a band in high school, and then I wanted to write about that. And so from the idea to getting the script finalized was a period of 10 years.
Wow.
Whereas Disconnected, we were presented with an idea for a screenplay, and a draft of a screenplay, and basically Dan and I wrote that together, and that took, how long did that take? Like a couple months?
I think it took about 3 or 4.
3 or 4 months, yeah. So
I think the thing that it gets confusing with is writing a first draft is very different to writing a final. And I suffer from not finishing things all the time, being the type of person that I have too many ideas and not enough time to write, and a very busy schedule. So I find that I write things on whatever's in front of me at the time.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of notebooks and a lot of paper and random ideas. And when I do get time, I will go and flesh that out and write it in into a document and develop it more. In terms of, I find the editing process a lot quicker than what Dia does. I think that's what the two different strengths. People that write very on reflex and use intuition a lot generally find writing the first draft a lot easier. It's easy for them to kind of get to that first point. It's doing the revision that they'll struggle with quite a lot.
the brain vomiting.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what they need to fix. Whereas it's kind of the opposite problem for people that are quite structured. We kind of overthink things.
Right. And then it's like you almost never finish it as a result.
Yeah, it's a major problem. I have recently been trying to write on a regular schedule. I think it's a battle that you never ever kind of quite finish.
Procrastination hits us all.
Oh yeah.
So with that said, would you recommend trying to get a first draft finished as quick as possible?
I think just getting something on paper is a good start, and it's more the consistency of writing. I think the biggest problem, and what I've been learning myself trying to overcome this, is that even if you're unsure of what to write for that scene, that is not the final. You can write a scene that's a throwaway scene that no one's ever going to see. That's just there to develop your characters or play with ideas. And because it's a learning process, you never 100% finish learning how to write scripts. Same with books or art. You can always perfect the craft.
That's right.
There is you're never going to achieve perfection because you're always your own worst critic. But in pursuing it, you learn a lot more about yourself and the type of stories you want to create. And I think that's an important part of the kind of journey, I would say.
Yeah, how have you
Being all
both...
philosophical now.
No, that's great. How have you both learned about screenwriting? Did you study something? Are you mainly looking at some of the screenwriting books? Where does your knowledge come from? Is it from practice?
Yeah, so I started off writing sort of short stories. Then when I decided to become a filmmaker, I started writing short scripts. And then I studied screenwriting at university for a bit. And I kind of learnt, all of the basics of that, like the structure and the rules and all that. Screenwriting is a lot more structured than novel writing. I'll say that. And then like I said, I get a lot of people sending me scripts to like give notes and stuff, and every time I feel like I read a new script, I'm always learning something as well. So like I recently went through a screenplay for someone, and I noticed they were using a lot of words like suddenly and then all of a sudden. And I'm like, you can't do that in a screenplay because screenplays need an active voice. You can't just be like, and suddenly appeared. Like, no, you have to, it's active. It's happening as we're reading it. So you say, so-and-so appeared.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Or I remember reading, they kept writing the word almost. They almost looked like this. They almost did that. And I had to say, you can't do that in a screenplay because a thing either is or it isn't. You don't almost, because how do you express that on film? And I guess also working behind the camera has helped me a lot with screenwriting, because I'm like, how do I turn this page of writing into vision? Like, how do I transfer it? There's a lot of things in this piece of paper that I physically can't do. So that's kind of how I've learned.
Yeah, awesome.
As for me, originally I studied game design, as I previously mentioned, and part of that was writing scripts. And originally these scripts were for game-oriented dialogue, so
The non-playable
very much,
characters?
yeah, branching stories and just kind of looking at it from a very high level. It wasn't until later on where I think I was mainly doing creative writing, so that's more like short stories, poetry, and then even novel writing, where I kind of started looking more back to screenwriting. And I think that's one thing that I have kind of learned a lot from, is how to take knowledge from one practice into another. As Dia said, there is a strong emphasis in screenwriting on what you can and can't do, because you're doing a script's representation of visuals. And there are things you can't show what's the inside of a person's head without specifically doing something interesting in structure-wise. You have to think about that. Are we going to do a shimmer and then go see what the person's thinking? There's more steps to showing thought. And I think that's where you can be very expressive in scripts. It's the creative solutions that you come up with. And story-wise, I lean a lot on actual like novel writing and kind of creative writing knowledge from that field, and how to structure story in more the general sense. What kind of stories and characters resonate with people. That's the same in film, in dance, in any other art form. There are certain elements that always work, and then there's other elements that you have to learn for the actual medium.
With the screenwriting process, are you often trying to reinvent the wheel, or is it almost kind of there's a process, there's almost tropes and themes that I can take from other things, and as a result I can kind of mishmash a project together? Or are you kind of trying to innovate as well?
Uh, for me personally, I think there's more classic in that regard. But for me, I tend to script wise, you want the script structure to be as kind of classic and uniform as possible to what most people expect, because people are going to be reading this and it needs to be in a format that they understand. But in terms of content of the story, I generally like to choose one element and push it to an extreme. This is a personal preference of mine. Whether it's I want to do a scene with sadness in it, or I have a script working on at the moment which is got no dialogue at all. It's all visual. And the whole point of that was for me to develop my expression through visuals and not just dialogue. I did this on the back of doing a script that was very dialogue heavy.
Right.
So I wanted to push myself in two different directions.
How do you go about expressing visuals? So do you usually find images as well? Like, do you kind of put together a little mood board, or do you entirely do it in a similar fashion than novels where you've got long descriptions and you kind of, whatever you see in your head, that's what you're writing down on the page?
So that also comes up with the idea that there is two kind of screenplays. You've got your shooting script and your spec script. So a spec script is the screenplay that you give to potential producers, which is basically the story itself, which I feel like you can more so be more descriptive and flowery. But a shooting script, that's the kind of script you write if you are the one shooting it. So that often has a lot of like camera pans and camera movements, and it will sometimes specify the exact location. So yeah, that's what you would write if you know you're the one doing it. I don't know where I was going with this, but yeah.
In terms of that as well, based on your question, generally you don't use imagery in the first pass. That's more when you get to production. And the director or the creative side, they bring their vision of what things look like. When you're creating it yourself, I tend to think very visually. I think about what the frame is and all those elements. But what you got to remember also is that when you're writing a script, it's not in the frame that it's in your head. If you're thinking about something from that very tight angle, that's generally the shooting script. It's more, if you want to write those, you can. It's just that some directors
will just ignore
them.
Right.
They'll do their own thing because that's part of their expression.
With spec scripts, you need to be prepared to kill your darlings. Don't be precious. My first feature that I directed was someone else's screenplay, and the screenwriter and I had very different kind of like visual ideals of what we wanted the story to be, and we butted heads a lot because they were on set a lot. So yeah, my advice to screenwriters is be prepared that if you give your script to someone else, it will become their story. My advice in that case is don't be on set because it's gonna hurt.
Right.
Seeing your characters done someone else's way. I've seen a lot of screenwriters come on sets and they've hated it.
Right.
Because it's not their vision, it's not how they envisioned it. And then they kind of just destroy the kind of emotions of everyone around them, and it's not a good time.
Well, there are so many ways where things can go wrong, I guess, vision-wise when it comes to the play, like the screenwriting. I mean, the actors can take a different direction. The director could take a different direction. So yeah, I guess it would be to not get offended and still be happy that your work is being produced and developed, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the elements where you want to capture the emotions and the kind of the broad strokes, so to speak, of what your story is in a way that you've written a good script, or it's something that people resonate with when you can give it to somebody else and their image aligns closer to what you were imagining. If you're giving someone a script and they read it and they completely misinterpret the emotions in a scene, sometimes that means that you haven't clarified them enough, or you haven't developed the character enough. That's not to mention, that could be that person just didn't pick up on it as well. So this is a thing where getting multiple people to read your scenes that have multiple levels of backgrounds, whether it's, a kind of high level of story writing knowledge or even quite basic, it's always a experience with that. It's always something where they will give you advice telling you that I would change this to that and I would do it this way. That's up to you to decide. At the end of the day, you're the creative. Don't take it to heart. Everyone has difference of opinion. I feel like it's one of those things that over time you learn where your kind of issues are. You learn if you keep having the same thing, like same comments pop up. You learn that that's a weakness of yours and that you need to work on it.
Right.
I think the main thing to do is to write and sometimes put your own work away for a little bit, work on something else, and come back to it with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
I think that helps as well. It's all about developing your own sense of story and what you want to communicate, and just trying to get that across.
I love that. That's fantastic. And I actually think that's a great place to end the podcast as well. So thank you so much for listening to The Creative Constitution. We hope you've learned something new about screenwriting, and we'll see you in the next one.